scream at my students, and I force them to listen to me. I hope you can hear me. I'm delighted to be here today. What a wonderful turnout. Thanks for coming out to see these great films, this little tribute to a very important American movie star of the great golden age, James Cagney, who I understand was known as Jim and not Jimmy to his friends. In the interest of making sure that we get to the film, because I'm a college professor and my students have to listen to me for an hour and a half, I've drafted some notes that will keep me on task. I'm sure I'll jump up and improvise on more than one occasion. But I just want to make sure I get to share a certain amount of information with you, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you today. Let's do a little background on Jimmy Cagney. I thought since it's a tribute to James Cagney that we might learn a little bit more about him and his past, and in addition to that, speak a little bit about his persona and work our way up to White Heat, which is sort of, a late film for Cagney, right? 1949, and he's been Jimmy Cagney now for about 20 years, according to American movie audiences. So thought I'd give us a little bit of background. James Cagney Jr. was born on the Lower East Side of New York. If you didn't know, he's a New Yorker. In 1899, so he's kind of like a millennial of the turn of the last century, right? His father, James Jr., was a sometimes bartender and sort of a full-time drunkard, it appears from the biographies. He himself, his dad, was a product of the notorious Irish ghetto known as the Five Points here in New York. Cagney's mother, whose name was Carrie, was half Irish and half Norwegian, and her father operated a coal barge on the East River. They say he looked and acted just like Popeye. I don't know if that's true. The family, being upwardly mobile in its own way, as all good Americans try to be, decided to move from the Lower East Side, and shortly after Jim was born, the family moved up to Yorkville. They first rented an apartment on East 79th Street, and then a few years later, while the family was growing, they moved up to East 96th Street, and then finally, when Jim was a young teenager, they settled for a period of time on 78th Street. So they're very much creatures of this side of Manhattan. The Cagneys were a poor but loving family. Jim had three brothers, one of whom became his business manager, and the bane of Jack Warner's existence. Although I understand in truth, Jack Warner was the bane of everybody else's existence. Jim Cagney, who had grown up in neighborhoods with lots of Jewish kids, picked up a lot of Yiddish, and he used to call Jack Warner the schwanz. I won't translate that for you. They didn't have a friendly relationship. His other two brothers became doctors. He had a sister, Jean Cagney, some of you may or may not know, tried her hand at acting for a period of time. Cagney gave her some opportunities to do that, but she came along much later than the brothers. The Cagneys' family life largely orbited around their mother, Carrie, who kept the household together. Cagney's dad died finally when he was a teenager. And she always encouraged the boys to learn to use their fists to defend themselves from neighborhood bullies. And Jim was by far the best scrapper in the group. In later life, in fact, he claimed he learned a curious lesson by watching fighters. He learned the beauty of the art of dance by watching one of the neighborhood fighters use fancy footwork to outbox a bigger and stronger opponent. So it's interesting to me for those people who never quite put two and two together and say, how is it that this tough gangster was also such a great dancer? Cagney's idea was that being light on your feet was more of a martial art and not what people used to call sissy stuff, right? And he happened to be a wonderfully talented dancer. Keen to see her children rise out of the tenements, Carrie encouraged her boys to love learning and took them to lectures at local churches and at settlement houses. The Cagneys were regular fixtures at the East Side Settlement House and a little bit later here at Lenox Hills. Jimmy Cagney was very much involved with this organization as a teenager. And this is where Cagney also probably got his first taste of show business. Impressed into service as a last-minute replacement for one of his brothers, who was a little shy and came here to take drama lessons to learn about public speaking. He appeared for the first time on stage in a skimpy Nijinsky-style bodysuit as a mythological faun. Are you imagining this, Jimmy Cagney? So impressed were the play's producers with Cagney's spunk and on-stage charisma, which was just a gift he had, that they actually convinced Lenox Hill to offer him a modest job in the interest of keeping him close at hand as a doorman or something. Here, but really they wanted to make sure he didn't disappear so they could put him in the next play. He also worked briefly, by the way, at the Friars Club, where he claimed not to have any particular interest in the celebrity of his clients. He worked as a bellhop. He got lots of free tickets, complimentary tickets to Broadway shows, and so he got an opportunity there to taste the Broadway theater. As a teenager, enchanted by both theater and dance. In fact, there's a wonderful, he allowed himself to be interviewed quite extensively later in life, and he claimed that he went to see the Russian prima ballerina Anna Pavlova, probably, I think she was in New York around 1916, so that probably dates it. He said he was so moved he wept both times he saw her. Wonderfully different images than we have of his generic screen persona, right? But impressed with dance and theater, he jumped at the chance a few years later to make $35 a week working in a burlesque comedy at B.F. Keith's 86th Street Theater. The part required him to perform in full drag. The pay was great, though, he said, and $35 in 2019 money is about $600 a week, to put it in perspective, pretty good. And in addition to that, he learned to walk in heels, so a little side benefit. About a year later, he was dancing on Broadway, and that's when he met the love of his life, a cute young dancer from Iowa named Frances Vernon. They called her Willie. Her middle name was Willard, and the two quickly joined forces romantically and professionally, and toured the country dancing in what was known as small-time vaudeville at that time. They married at New York City Hall in 1922 and continued to ply their trade as a dance team for the next several years. They even operated for a brief time a dance academy. I understand it didn't do too well, but they both loved teaching. In 1925, though, Cagney was somewhat unexpectedly given a role, his first dramatic role, in a play written by the well-known playwright Maxwell Anderson called Outside Looking In. He probably got the role largely because he was short and had red hair. His character was named Little Red. But having said that, he received unexpectedly positive reviews for his dramatic performance from the New York critics, and there was a sense that maybe this guy wasn't just a dancer but had other talents as well. His real big break, though, came about 5 years later in 1930, when he appeared as a kind of a spoiled mama's boy gone bad in a theatrical crime drama called Penny Arcade. Now, Al Jolson, a name people probably still remember, right, who was at that time something like the king of the talking pictures, which had come along a few years earlier with the jazz singer. Al Jolson went to see the play, was so impressed with it that he bought the rights to it and turned around and offered to sell them to Jack Warner. Warner Brothers had produced the jazz singer, so he had a strong relationship with Warner Brothers. And Jack Warner then decided that maybe he'd go see this play before he bought the damn thing. And he was so impressed with Cagney's performance that he not only bought the rights, he immediately put Cagney under a short-term contract. Also, his co-star in the play, Joan Blondell, if people remember Joan Blondell as well. Retitled Sinner's Holiday, the film version of Penny Arcade, Cagney's first film role, opened in New York in the fall of 1930. Remember, this is the birth of the age of the talking picture. They were still making silent movies even in 1929 because a lot of theaters weren't wired for sound yet. So you might say 1930 is for the sort of the first year in which you could solidly depend on getting a talking picture in every theater. And here, Cagney appears in his first feature. Although he's perhaps a little baby-faced, you can see it. Warner Archives put it out on DVD if you want to find it. And maybe he's a little bit less self-assured than he would shortly appear to be in his later roles. Looking at Sinner's Holiday today, you can absolutely, completely see the Cagney persona fully born right there in his very first feature. It's extraordinary. And maybe, and I'll try hard not to try to imitate him too much because I'm sure I don't do it well. But we might think about that great Cagney persona that emerged at that moment, right? First, there's that wonderful way Cagney holds his hands, if you haven't thought about it, right? They're always relaxed at the wrist. But he always moves them with exquisite precision, like he keeps them at rest and then they do exactly what they need to. Even putting on a hat becomes this kind of wonderful dance-like movement, right? So we see that dancer emerging in his whole body. Then, of course, there's that great Jimmy Cagney voice, right? That you'll notice really originates from the throat. You're ready to ride, right? Somewhere back here, and it's always trying to fight its way out through those clenched teeth, right? And also, we might think about that resiliently vernacular accent. Yeah, at a time when an army of elocution teachers were running around Hollywood trying to get all of the new talking picture stars to learn to speak with what was called a mid-Atlantic accent, somewhere between Long Island and London, right? Cagney was really the only major, at least male A-list actor who had permission to talk like a real person, not like a movie god, right? At least a real person who was from England. And then let's think about Cagney's smile, which always impresses me, right? Because the unique thing about his smile is that his on-screen persona always reserves it for dangerous situations, not for happy ones. It's a smile that says, as long as I can keep this guy happy, I might get out of here alive, right? And then everything else is very serious business. Of course, by the time White Heat comes along, about 20 years later, 1949, and Cagney's a man of about 50 by that time, the corners of that smile will turn down permanently. And the look on his face says more like, now I'm the dangerous one around here. Something to think about as you're watching the film. Finally, last thing I'll say about Cagney's physiognomy, or his on-screen persona, there's this wonderful way he not only acted, but reacted to every gesture and every word that his co-stars made, right? In some ways predicting what people would later call method acting and all that kind of stuff. But watch him. He's completely animated all the time, right? It's as if he's hearing every word and responding to every gesture they make for the first time, as if he's just actually seen it. And I guess I want to argue that there were few other actors during the Golden Age who seemed so at ease with this on-screen persona and so natural in it, who seemed to resiliently, endlessly say to the audience, I really am this guy. Right? I'm not just acting here, I'm this person. So a year later, a year and a few lesser, probably now forgotten pictures later, Cagney appeared in what's now widely recognized as his breakthrough role, The Public Enemy, in which he played the character Tom Powers. That's 1931. And that became one of the cornerstones of the famous Hollywood gangster cycle of the early 1930s. And you might think about how the gangster movie is really a creature of the sound movie era, right? With all of those rattling machine guns and squealing tires. Those would have been pretty boring silent movies, right? You need those sound effects to really bring them alive. And while really fine performers like Edward G. Robinson and Paul Muni kind of played at being gangsters, I sometimes call it mafia camp, although I greatly respect their work, Cagney really is Tom Powers. There's a sense that he lived that life and he is this guy. Brash and in many ways foolish, but he's admirable for what I'll call his blind courage, and above all for a person who, in spite of the fact that he's living a criminal lifestyle, has real feelings, right? Really feels for the world and other people, has an ethical quality. I'd say it's this quality that separated Cagney from the other great movie mobsters. There was a person that lurked beneath all that manicured bravado. And for the next 20 years, Cagney really, you might argue, served as something like the preeminent anti-hero of the golden age of Hollywood, maybe only its major anti-hero, right? The only real major A-list star who could style himself as the bad guy, yet somehow in the end come off feeling like the good guy. And this quality really served him well through the 30s when he appeared in great films like the one we just completed here, Angels with Dirty Faces, also The Roaring Twenties, another great film. Movies that really sealed his reputation, not just as a kind of a tough guy, but almost as a kind of working class saint. Yeah. So in the interest of getting to our feature tonight, I'm going to skip over the 40s in a significant way, and the Second World War years, although this was a time where we might observe that Cagney, who was never terribly enamored of Hollywood or Hollywood culture, started to spend more and more time on his farm in Martha's Vineyard. Even as a young teenager, he said he only wanted to be a farmer. It was his life's great ambition. He even applied to agricultural school. And he kept away from Hollywood as much as he could. He came to need some money, though, by the late 40s, because he and his brother, Bill, who had served as his business manager, had started at that time, as many movie stars tried to do, independent production companies, figuring, he's figuring he won't share the money with the Schwanz anymore, he'll keep it all himself. But probably the only nice thing Jack Warner ever said is, don't try it. And it turns out, in fact, that most of the stars who tried to go in independent production wound up going broke, which may be largely because the studios also controlled the movie theaters, so you couldn't get your film played. But he needed an income, and he agreed to go back to Warner's, and agreed one more time at least to play his classic gangster role, and that's in the film you'll be watching this afternoon, White Heat. By 1949, of course, Hollywood And I would say the world in general had become a different place, than it had been in the 1930s. If a depression hadn't beaten the kind of honky-tonk bravado out of the American personality, a devastating war, unprecedented in its brutality, seems to have done so. And it wasn't just that the great movie stars were getting older, the Cagneys and the Gables and Cary Grant and Henry Fonda and all those great actors of that time. But I would even argue a certain spirit of make-believe had started to lead the culture as well. Despite, and perhaps because of America's unprecedented economic success, it was as if the world had become a somewhat grimmer and in some ways more dangerous place. And I think that White Heat reflects the sensibility. So enter, therefore, the, quote, hero, I'll put in quotes, the hero of today's movie, Cody Jarrett, who's the last of the great gangsters that Cagney would perform on screen, although that's not entirely true because his brother's company made a film the following year called Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, which is kind of a nice movie in a lot of ways, and he plays a gangster in that as well. By far, it's his last well-known role as a gangster. From the moment that Cody Jarrett appears on screen, we know we're not dealing with flamboyant anti-heroes like Tom Powers from The Public Enemy or Rocky Sullivan from Into the Dirty Faces anymore. Cody Jarrett is nervous. He's worried. Being a criminal is a grim, thankless job. As soon as you see him on screen, you know what I'm talking about. So that optimism and even a kind of joie de vivre that Cagney's juvenile hoodlums had expressed has now been replaced as well with a kind of cynicism. Cagney's smile is now a kind of a smirk. And those cute retorts that he always made in his films of the 30s have now become really demeaning put-downs. Additionally, that kind of bigness of spirit that allowed Rocky Sullivan to turn yellow, as he does in Angels with Dirty Faces, had now become something different and darker, a kind of heartless misanthropy, even a kind of sadism. And there's a meanness in that character that I would say couldn't even be redeemed by a mother's love, and the strange reversal might have even been the result of it. So it's as if finally that kind of like brash, insouciant kid who turned to a life of crime 20 years earlier when Cagney first appeared on screen in Sinner's Holiday, had finally realized the bitter truth of Hollywood's oldest and most famous dictum. Say it along with me, crime does not pay. Right? So just to wrap up here with White Heat, the gangster movie itself and Cagney's persona, that Cagney mystique, kind of lose their playful veneer. That thing that made them kind of playthings of the golden age of Hollywood, even in its so-called social realist versions. And it starts to lose its sense of playful magic. Instead, White Heat marks the beginning of a kind of a new tradition, and maybe I'll put that in quotes too if you dare call, if I dare use the term tradition to describe a world in which art is no longer reflexively about edifying people and begins to focus more and more on the dark, on the dark side of the human spirit. So while Cagney's performance in this afternoon's film is unbelievably memorable, I mean even epical, anybody, even my father vaguely remembers having seen it, but all he remembers is Cody Jarrett saying, "I'm on top of the world," and you'll see, right? There's something absolutely unforgettable about it. But at the same time with Cody Jarrett, I would say there's a significant shift here. We kind of lose that beloved street fighter, that kind of pure-hearted Robin Hood, who was part of this early optimistic American Republic. And it becomes instead something much more insidious and something that I think sometimes, and I guess I'm showing my hand as a pessimist, still seems to be with us in many ways too. At any rate, I hope you find the film interesting, and I thank you for your attention, and I hope you found my comments useful in some ways. Enjoy White Heat. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your wonderful insight into White Heat.